Welcome to Ask Nelda Almost Anything. My name, of course, is Nelda Schulte, and joining us from BC is Gil Donkersgoed, and our special guests tonight are Cory Sperle and Sherilynn Milsom. A little bit more on them later. In fact, a lot more on them later. My online business, neldaschulte.com, helps property investors and landlords build a profitable do-it-yourself business with resources including webinars, coaching, master classes, and lots of free resources. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to help landlords avoid the financial landmines that I stepped in when I first started being a landlord. And this is one of the ways that I can help people do that. And to that end, that's why I bring speakers on, because there are many different ways to invest. Not all of them will suit you. Some will suit you better than others. So I like to give people a smorgasbord of different investment strategies and investors so that you can choose for yourself which is the right investment tool for you. So tonight's topic is how to buy properties with zero down and no mortgage using seller financing. And that involves commercial properties or multifamilies or apartment buildings. And Cory Sperle is our expert on that. And Sherilynn Milsom is our expert on buying single family dwellings with rent option to purchase. There, I nearly said the wrong word. Option to purchase is what I wanted to say. So welcome, Cory, and welcome, Sherilynn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So for starters, who wants to answer this question? What is an agreement for sale? For those listeners who don't know what it is.
Go ahead, Sherilynn. This is your area of expertise.
Yeah, I've actually been teaching agreements for sale and rent to own and other creative strategies for a whole lot of years. So I'm used to explaining it. So an agreement for sale is when you take control over a property and you get beneficial ownership of that property, but the legal ownership or title stays in the seller's name and the financing is between the seller and the buyer. So there could be an underlying mortgage that is dealt with in that, or it could be they own it outright and you set up a mortgage between you and the seller. But yeah, the financing is nothing to do with you directly with the bank as the buyer.
Excellent. Okay. That's a good explanation. And by the way, Sherilynn, I always like the way that you explain things. You've got a very nice, clear, succinct way that I can follow through very easily on. So yes. Good call, Cory. Okay. So what is the difference between an agreement for sale and buying a property through a bank with a mortgage? And I know you explained that a little bit. Maybe we could flesh it out a little bit more.
Yeah. So when you're buying with a bank mortgage, of course, you have to prove down payment. You need 20 or 25% down in most cases. For a single family, obviously with multifamily, it's easier to get CMHC, but Cory is the expert on that, not me. So with bank financing for single family, yes, 20 or 25% down. You have to qualify as an individual. It's really hard to buy a whole lot of properties because you just top out with mortgages. So once you get into dealing with seller financing, you're just bypassing the bank. You're dealing directly with the seller and you're figuring out terms that work for both of you, taking into account there could be that underlying mortgage that stays with the seller and you're dealing with that directly with the seller, not with the bank.
Yeah, it's an excellent explanation. And actually, I think this is probably the type of way that most people bought properties many years ago before banks stepped into the picture and did the whole mortgage thing and made us all in debt. I wrote a whole article about this. So I'm all for seller financing because I think everybody wins, my 2 cents. So what's the difference between an agreement for sale and a joint venture? Because I know people have heard of joint ventures and they're probably thinking, well, is this a joint venture? Is an option for sale, an agreement for sale, a joint venture? How does that all work?
Cory, you want to handle this one?
Yeah, I guess I'll maybe add a few points to the earlier question. Yeah, basically, Sherilynn spells an agreement for sale perfectly well. It's very common in commercial. Usually it happens when there's a massive gap in the mortgage to be assumed and in length of time. So in a lot of cases, the mortgage penalties can be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars on a commercial property. So oftentimes an agreement for sale can solve, two things. The seller can sell, he can get a higher price, and the buyer can get terms that he couldn't get anywhere else by setting up a creative strategy like that. So, agreement for sale or vendor take, vendor take-back mortgages are very much the same way, right? You can assume a mortgage, and an agreement for sale it's not exactly the same thing, but it's a variation. I can talk about the differences with commercial and kind of single family later, but to your question, a joint venture and an agreement for sale, yeah, two completely different things. An agreement for sale is simply a financing strategy to buy or sell a property.
Okay.
So if I want to sell a property, I may do an agreement for sale because I want a higher price. Most of the time, the seller's number one thing they're focused on is price, right? So they will sometimes bend to terms. Bend is a bad word. They'll consider other terms to get the higher price. So they'll take a vendor take back, or offer a vendor take back, or do an agreement for sale. Now, I think I term creative financing as anything that goes outside of a conventional bank. So I know there's, you can do bridge loans, BRRRRs, all these other things, but I consider more creative these financing strategies. And the key point is they are short term, at least they are in commercial. So whether you're taking on a vendor take or you're doing an agreement for sale, eventually you need to take out that mortgage or lien with conventional financing. Typically, these aren't held for more than 3 to 5 years. So that's key to know. It's not like I can do an agreement for sale or a vendor take and have it for 25 years.
Okay.
You could with a motivated seller, or in a different situation, it's possible. Like you go back to, 100 years ago, my grandfather bought all his land that way. It was a vendor take back. He essentially gave him the land and he made payments. But a joint venture can basically be referring to anything. Like a joint venture is where you have one or two parties coming together to buy a property, to buy an ice cream stand, to buy a business. It could be anything. It could be any number of entity, any number of financing options. Agreement for sale is specifically referring to one avenue of creative financing to either buy or to sell a property.
Okay, great.
Can I ask a quick question about this?
Yep.
Sure.
In the case of, so Sherilynn touched on the fact that you can only get a certain number of mortgages from banks, after which they'll just say no. And does an agreement for sale, that is not considered part of the mortgages that you have when dealing with banks?
That's correct. I used to include all of my agreement for sale purchases on my mortgage applications because I was taking the money, and I still do take the money from my creative purchases, creative real estate, like rent to own and agreements for sale. I take that profit and I invest it into long-term buy and holds, usually with conventional financing. So when I would be going to buy a legally suited property, I'd include all of this on my mortgage application. And my mortgage broker, she wasn't, sorry, not a mortgage broker. She was the TD mortgage specialist. So she worked directly with TD. And she was saying, what is this property? You're not on the mortgage. You're not on title. Why are you including this? And I went through that several times, and then I just stopped including it because you're not on mortgage. You're not on title. With a vendor take back, that you are, because you are switching title and you do have some vendor financing. But with agreement for sale, that is its own little entity. You are not changing title. You're not changing legal ownership. And your name isn't on anything except for that agreement for sale document itself, the purchase agreement, and the caveat on title, which protects your interest. So yeah, it doesn't show up on your debt coverage ratio. It doesn't show up on your overall debt borrowings, nothing.
Great. So
one point I want to add to that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but you said we run into this financial wall, on single family. It's usually around 3 or 4 properties. That's not the case with multifamily. As long as you can qualify, you could buy 100 buildings in a month if you could find them and find the money. So that's the big difference between commercial. So I tend to see agreement for sale as it's almost like a wraparound mortgage. The seller, he keeps his mortgage here and you wrap one around his. So you're still making payments to him. He's making payments to his bank. Okay. So he should be positive cash flow. So he should actually be making money in the process. He's eliminated the headache of the property. He's going to sell at a higher price, and he's going to sell a couple of years from now at the price you're giving him today. The benefit for you is you're buying today's prices in maybe 2 or 3 years from now that should be much higher than today. So that's why it's a real win-win when it can come together and click.
Yeah,
actually, another win to add to that, if the seller is selling a rental property, whether it's single family or commercial, the capital gains can be divided over up to 5 years.
Yeah.
So the seller can save loads of money in taxes. So this strategy is also for us as rental property providers when we want to sell a property, not just to buy properties. It's a great way to sell properties and unload, dog properties and get more money out of it, save capital gains. It's fantastic exit strategy.
So it kind of makes you wonder why anybody goes through a bank. But I guess that's how we've been conditioned to think, right? We've been conditioned to think. I mean, you see this in schools. Banks go into schools and they have kids set up bank accounts, and they set up a bank. So they get them thinking the only way you can do this is through a bank. But people didn't used to use banks before. Like Cory's grandfather didn't use banks. I'm sure that my grandparents didn't use banks when they bought their properties or their farms. I'm sure it was an entirely different situation at that point. So we're going back to creative strategies, what works now with option to purchase rather than traditional, if you can call traditional the last 50 years. So, okay. So it's a very specific niche. Do you have a lawyer who specializes in agreement for sales, or how do you unearth a lawyer who knows even what that kind of stuff is?
Well, I know for single family, you absolutely have to have a lawyer who specializes in that. My guess is with commercial, because it's so much more common, they probably all specialize. I don't know, Cory, what do you think?
Well, it's an amendment on the purchase contract, but the realtor has to understand what it is to write it into the contract. So usually when you do an agreement for sale or a vendor take, it'll be an amendment, right? It'll be in a separate document that attaches to the main contract. It has to be spelled out clearly what it is and the terms of the AFS, agreement for sale. I'd say the main difference though is, especially if the realtor hasn't done one, you should almost get your lawyer to look at the contract before you write it. I wouldn't just use a normal boilerplate contract for an agreement for sale. That can work with a vendor take back because they're fairly simple. But on an agreement for sale, I wouldn't. One thing, Nelda, you said is, why do people use the bank? I just have to add in there, it's not necessarily bad. I mean, I think I like to think of the bank as my friend with commercial, because they're not going to let me do anything stupid. If I try to over leverage, if I try to fit outside of the debt coverage ratio, they're going to slap me. I have to send them reports every year. I have to send them my net worth. I have to send them, property management statements, you name it. With creative financing, no, you don't have to do that. But then you also can make a mistake at the beginning. You can pay too much for the property. This is why Sherilynn said is great for selling, because you can run into maybe an unsophisticated buyer that's done this, right? So that's one of the things that to keep in mind. The bank is your best friend in a lot of cases, but these creative deals do work under certain circumstances.
The bank is your conservative parent who's behind the scenes saying, "Don't do anything stupid."
That's a really good point, Cory, because as I always say when I'm teaching this, just because you can buy a property with nothing down doesn't mean you should buy a property with nothing down. Yeah, that can be a huge mistake. And I mean, so attractive. Oh yeah, it's nothing down. I don't have to qualify with the bank, so I could do this all day long. Well, no, not if it costs you money every single month. The numbers have to work. You still have to do your due diligence on the property, regardless of what type of property it is.
Yeah, I wanted to add, you have to be careful about the kind of house you're getting. Because I know someone else who does option to purchase or agreement for sales, and she doesn't ever buy a house that's older than 10 years old, because that's when they start having problems. And I can attest to that. With one of my properties is over 40 years old, and I probably put $10,000 a year in for the last 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Sewage has burst, cracks in the foundation, on and on and on. When there were the fires in Fort McMurray, I was praying that it would burn down, but it didn't. It survived to torture me another decade.
And the house, three houses down, actually went up.
And the ones across the street. So I think maybe I prayed to the wrong God. Maybe that's what happened. Anyway, Gil, do you want to take over?
Sure. So I think we've answered this question already fairly well, but the next question that comes up is, why would a seller want to sell through an AFS rather than a bank? Are there any other reasons besides the ones you've already mentioned?
If you're selling single family, then it opens you up to more buyers, because there are a lot of people, especially right now, there are people with a lot of money, but they can't qualify for a mortgage because of the high interest rates and the stress test. And so, yeah, I mean, whether or not their credit is bruised or not, they just can't qualify for a mortgage right now, even though they've got 20% down. So that's another time where I would be looking to sell a property to somebody with a nice high down payment who can't qualify for a mortgage.
Mm-hmm. So can you, sorry, I was going to let you take over this, but can you give me a profile of somebody who might not qualify for a mortgage, who would qualify for an agreement for sale?
Somebody with lots of money and high income.
So I'm guessing an immigrant, for example.
Pardon me?
For example, an immigrant. Someone
Yeah.
who's only been in the country for a couple of years, they've got money, they've got a good job, but they haven't had enough time to establish a credit rating. I'm just spitballing.
Well, and
Or you've just
COVID,
been laid off from your job. There's a variety of situations that this falls under. Divorce, people have short-term issues that they're in the middle of trying to resolve. There's a lot of different circumstances.
yeah, and COVID played a number on a lot of people with reduced hours. So their notice of assessment that the bank uses for proof of income is not going to be as high as it needs to be for the house they want. So that's another thing there. Or people who have just newly started a business. Again, you need those couple of years of tax assessments at the higher rate. People who are self-employed and make too many deductions, and then again, their verifiable income is too low. So there's a lot of potential for buyers for these. And then as far as who wants to sell, which may have been your question, I think I may have gotten confused there, but who would like to sell with these? They might. I've had people who they just don't want to deal with a realtor. They end up getting pretty close to the same net that they would get if they sold through a realtor, because by the time you take off a deduction to attract buyers, if that's required, the realtor's fees, the mortgage prepayment penalties, as Cory said, they can be huge in multifamily, but I mean, they can even be, you know, I once had a prepayment penalty myself of over $16,000 on a $300,000 house. That's huge. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why, and again, the tax deferral, there's a lot of reasons why people would want to sell this way.
So when did you start buying properties with AFSs? AFSs?
Sherilynn, probably that's to you. Probably since as long as you've been doing real estate. 2006, I'm going to guess. See if I'm right.
No, actually, I started with rent to own first. I didn't do agreements for sale right away. I started with doing rent to own as a business, regular rental first, then rent to own. I started that in 2008. And oh goodness, I can't remember when my first agreement for sale was. 2010, 11, something like that.
Which makes the next question difficult to answer. Sorry, my voice is going a bit funny. It's what was your first AFS property? Well,
I don't know if this is the first, but this is the most interesting just because it functioned like bridge financing, because I've got this property where the seller, her husband had died with no life insurance. The house was half renovated. The renovations were terrible and had to be torn apart. And she had a second on the house that was high interest. So this could not be a longer term, 3 or 5 years, as Cory was saying, couldn't be a longer term agreement for sale. But this was a prime candidate for a flip. And so we went in there, bought it with zero down. Oh no, sorry. I think it was $2,500 down just to give her some moving money, basically. So $2,500 down. She got to move on with her life. We had an agreement for sale for either 6 or 8 months while we renovated the property and then put it up for sale and sold it. Now, the cool thing is no bridge financing fees, no high interest for bridge financing, no mortgage qualification, and no down payment pretty much. So we had all of that money still sitting there to do the renovations. And then once we were done the renovations, we did end up just selling it conventionally through a realtor, but we could have refinanced it, put it into our regular rental portfolio, or we could have done a rent to own on it. And, that even makes more money as an exit. We could have done whatever we wanted with it. So that's why I say that one was the most interesting out of all the ones I've done.
Multiple exit strategies. It's always good to have that, set up a deal that offers that for sure.
And that's what I like about real estate. There's so many different creative things you could do depending on the person's situation and your situation. You can kind of work it out together. It doesn't have to fit into a little box. It's like, this is what the bank tells you can do. If you don't fit, off you go.
So, was this a difficult deal to actually accomplish? Like, was it hard to convince? You're shaking your head already. Go ahead.
Well, this is one of those situations where she couldn't afford her next mortgage payment. The house was not going to sell well because what the renovations were half done and what was done looked terrible. So it didn't have mass appeal. It only had appeal to a really tiny portion of the market, people like me, right? So yeah, for her, it was just a no-brainer that she got to get the monkey off her back, didn't have to worry about her next mortgage payment. It was just problem solved.
So basically, you were the only market for this property would be someone who wanted to flip or improve the property. It wasn't a place that someone was going to be able to move into and turn into a home right away. And that's the majority of people out there, I think, who are buying properties outside of investors or people who are saying, okay, I want to live somewhere.
Oh yeah. And they don't want to do any work. They just want it done already.
Okay, I think Nelda, it's back to you now.
No, I was going to ask you, Cory, what was your first agreement for sale?
Believe it or not, I haven't actually done one. And it's funny because I actually teach this. I took Sherilynn's course throughout the summer because I wanted to learn about it from the single family perspective, because I'm actually a renter right now myself. I'm in Kelowna. I'm between properties and I'm also self-employed. So this strategy fits in perfectly with what I'm trying to get into a property in an expensive market in the Okanagan. Now, I'm not diving right in immediately because even though I know I can get something with next to nothing down, prices are falling right now and interest rates are rising. So I would jump on the right opportunity, but just not right now. Now, on the commercial side, I've made plenty of offers for agreement for sale, but those are few and far between. And the only time I will ever consider it is usually if it's a 10-year mortgage and there's a significant time. Like I like the 3 to 4 year mark where it gives me enough time to get in there and do a proper BRRRR, get the rents up, especially with rent control laws, rent restriction laws, they've changed it in Alberta. It used to be we could do it every 3 months, Saskatchewan every 3 months. Now it's once a year with 90 days notice. Now Saskatchewan, you can do that, once every 6 months, but a little bit of a different scenario. So I would only do it if the rents were low enough. Rents have to be low enough that I know that I can get the upside potential and I can take out that loan in that 3-year time frame. That's the only time I would consider it under those circumstances. Now I can give you a couple of examples. So, if I had bought something in let's say 2010, someone who bought the building, in 2006 or something like that, when it was low. And, the next few years it appreciated a lot, so if I had an agreement for sale for 3 years and I agreed to pay X price, great. I'm sitting pretty, right? I've got a ton of equity. I have low debt. I could easily go to the bank and take that out. Now, if I would have done like 100%, AFS, which I know some people have done, I've done like as high as 95% vendor take. You can go as high a leverage as the seller will agree. Okay. But like you said, just because you can doesn't mean you should. But let's imagine you did that in 2014 in Edmonton on a multifamily project. Well, we all know that rents have plunged 20% since then, and they still have not recovered. We are now 8 years later in Alberta, and rents still are not back to 2014 levels. So we basically lost eight years of rents. The markets are cyclical in Alberta. Typically, every 10 years, there's a downturn. So right now, we're swinging back up, and we're swinging back up fast. But let's say I had done that agreement for sale. Let's say I had agreed to the seller, like $2 million or something, AFS. I'm gonna pay this out in 1 year or 2 years. Well, now the property is only worth like 1.6 million. And now I'm in a really tight spot with the seller. So I either have to try to extend it, but chances are, he's in a position where he can just take the building back from me. So likewise, I wouldn't sell it to someone unless I knew that they were in a position that they could qualify for the bank and get it out. Just because they're offering me a higher price, that doesn't really mean a whole lot to me because, in the matter of 3 months, you can completely trash a multifamily building. So, just because he's got the building, I could get it back in its worth nothing. Likewise, when I'm doing it, it's different than an assumption. On an assumption, your lien actually goes on title. Now, Sherilynn can, expand on this more than I can, but it's different with an agreement for sale. There's a caveat or some kind of a caution put on the title. So I don't know exactly if the person can go out and get another lien on the property. I don't think it's probably possible. That's why you really need strong legal representation to set this up. But I just gave you a couple of examples of there when it would work.
Mhm.
And like I said, the main reason why I've put plenty of offers on, but it's usually when there's really high gap to close. Like if it's $1 million property and there's only a 500,000 mortgage. Well, I can't get a top up on that, and he doesn't want to take a vendor take. Agreement for sale is a perfect scenario under that circumstance, right? But then you have to have a realtor who can explain it. So oftentimes those properties, they sit there unsold for a long time. Now, his payout penalty really depends on where interest rates are today. Right now, I mean, if he's got a 1.5% mortgage, the bank would love you to collapse that mortgage. He's going to let you out of that scot-free. You don't have to pay nothing because that debt comes back, and they're going to make more money off it. Likewise, when interest rates were really low, and then you're trying to pay out a penalty, then the bank's not letting you out of it for nothing, right? Because they're not making any money. So there's a lot of factors you have to consider in these agreement for sale. But the main thing is on a buyer, you want to make sure that there's enough equity at the end. So you need to get the price cheap enough, and you need to have it long enough to get yours in there. So the long or the short, don't take on one that's too high a debt with too short of a timeline, especially in a rising interest rate environment and a falling value climate that we're in now. Now, I know single family and multifamily aren't exactly the same, but my personal advice is go as long as you can, and get as low a debt as possible or upside. So if you have really low rents and you can get that bump, then it's a winner. Then it's a winning strategy for sure. That was a mouthful.
It definitely was.
Just to add to that, just to clarify a bit, because when we're talking about buying with low money down or zero down, that doesn't mean that there's automatically no or little equity in the property.
Yes,
So
exactly.
yeah, so as Cory was saying, you don't want the debt to be too high. Yeah, so if there is an underlying mortgage on the property, you don't want that underlying mortgage to be close to the full value of the property unless there is that big upside, as he was saying. So for example, you might have a $400,000 property that only has a $250,000 mortgage, so it's not highly leveraged. And then you still might be able to put little to no money down on that property. And the reason why the seller would accept that is because they're getting that higher price without any hassles of the realtor. They're just unloading it. Maybe they're moving to another province and they just want it gone now, whatever, or getting divorced or whatever the case may be. And they just need it gone. They're willing to leave that equity in the property. So you have huge mortgage pay down every month. And then within that, say 2 or 3 years, now you've got enough equity in the property by all that mortgage pay down that you've enjoyed because there was already a lower mortgage balance, right? So then you can refinance. And we did this with one of our properties that we got by agreement for sale. There was nothing wrong with the people. There was nothing wrong with the property. They just didn't want to deal with a realtor. So they sold it to us for pretty much what they would have cleared if they had sold it any other. Well, actually they figured they got more. Maybe they got more. That's wonderful if that's the case, but I figure that we both got a good deal, so it was all right. They left over $100,000 equity in this property. My mortgage paid on every year was $17,000 on this $360,000 property. That's
Wow.
huge.
That
So
is
after, I don't know what it was, 5 years or something, I was able to refinance the property. And instead of having to put down a down payment, I pulled out money and refinanced the property and switched it into a regular rental. So you got it for free.
I was
that's
gonna
epic.
say, Sherilyn, you're still doing the same level of due diligence as you would on a normal purchase, where the bank is forcing diligence upon you. And in fact, you're doing it, probably more in some cases because there's a chance to make error. Nelda, I didn't ask you at the beginning, but I have people commenting on my feed. Is there going to be a question period at the end, or can people ask questions during the broadcast? I didn't.
Yeah, we can do that at the end.
Okay.
Sure. About the due diligence, what due diligence should you do before you buy a property? in a
Well, on
nutshell?
the commercial side, I'll just do this really quickly. I mean, the level of due diligence is massive. It can take months, right? You need reports. The biggest one is, the phase one ESA, environmental site assessment, right? You need an appraisal from an AACI certified appraiser. You need a building condition report from a certified engineer. Those are just the three basic ones. Now, some people have seen this just because they got an agreement for sale. Well, I can save money on the appraisal. I can save money on the phase one. I can save money on the building condition report. And I've seen that done, but I would highly not recommend that. When I'm doing a creative deal, my level of due diligence, just like when I'm using a joint venture partner, if I'm raising other people's capital, it is perfectly okay for me to lose my own money. It is not okay to lose someone else's money. So
Yeah.
when I get into these creative situations, I'm actually stepping up my due diligence, probably a factor of at least 2 or 3. I'm calling Sherilynn saying, "Hey, Sherilynn, did I miss anything?" I'm running it off of other people's sets of eyes because I don't have the same, banker lawyer, necessarily in my corner. So I'm very careful when I get into these deals.
And Sherilynn, by the way, is a math wizard.
She is.
That would not be me. I have to take my calculator out, but I'm glad somebody in this room is. So, okay, so there's a lot of due diligence you have to do with a property, multifamily. Sherry, what about a single family? What's your due diligence cycle?
You should be doing the same due diligence that you should be doing with a single family. But I mean, people skip it there too. With single family, you should be doing the same due diligence as you would with a mortgage. So you should be absolutely getting the pre-purchase inspection. And the funny thing is, a lot of people skip that because they figure, oh, there's nothing that he can't see that I can't see. But the thing I like about the pre-purchase inspection is then I'm there at the property for a minimum 2 hours, because we usually get 2 inspectors, a team with 2 inspectors. So you're there for 2 hours. And so then you're also walking around the property, noticing things that you didn't notice before because you're there for 2 hours wandering around. And then you can also make your list of what needs to be done by your contractor or your handyman for when you do get possession. So if for nothing else, that second set of eyes is great, but it forces you to have a better look at the property. And then absolutely, unless you're really familiar with the market, you should be getting an appraisal. And I always put it in my agreement, even if I think I might not get an appraisal on this one, I always put it as a condition. And I can decide later whether I want to or not, because maybe I talk to my trusted realtor, who gets comparative market analysis. And because I was thinking, oh, this property is worth $375 after repaired value. And then the CMA comes back and says $350. Oh, well, that cuts my margin a little tight. That's not the upside I was looking for. But let's get a proper appraisal done now just to confirm, see where we're really sitting at. So yeah, you definitely want to do all of that, because even though if you screw up, yeah, sure, you can just walk away and give this property back to the seller. But is that really how you want to have your reputation built?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, good. So be professional, do your due diligence in every aspect of this, and present yourself the best you can to them and to others, because people are watching you. Okay. What education is out there for people who are interested in investing in agreement for sales?
There's a lot. Go ahead. You can take this one first. I think we're thinking the same thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot out there. I think the big thing when you're choosing which course to take is to make sure you're taking a course that is done by people who've been doing it for a long time and who have a track record. Because I know that a couple of my students have turned around and started teaching this, and I'm just thinking, oh, really? How many rent to own or agreement for sale have you done in this 6 months since you took my class? So yeah, you do need to make sure that you're learning from somebody who's got a track record, and also that there's a lot of really right down to the very basics operational instruction in the course. Because if all you're learning is the general theories of it, and oh, here's a contract, fill it out, that's not going to help you. You really need to know, here's what happens if this. Now here's what you do. And here's how you deal with this situation. And really experience-based operational knowledge of these creative strategies. And that applies whether it's agreement for sale, rent to own. We also, there are a lot of creative strategies out there, even joint ventures. You want to be learning from somebody who's got the down in the trenches knowledge.
Excellent.
Unfortunately, there is a lot. The market is saturated with a lot of gurus right now. I'll call them self-help, and there's a lot of good gurus out there. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Sherilynn's been doing this a long time. She has a fantastic course. I've taken it myself, but there is a lot of people. There is a lot of people out there that, unfortunately, when you use the word creative real estate, it just sets off triggers in people's minds that I can. It's like a late night infomercial. I can buy property with no money down all the time. And sure, you can, but that's not usually how it goes, right? It's a great strategy to sow into your portfolio, but unfortunately, it's like BRRRR. Like, we didn't use the term BRRRR. Like, we always said value add. Up until 6 months ago, I've been doing apartment buildings for 20 years, and I never even heard of BRRRR. I didn't even know what the hell it was. Someone had to tell me what it was. Oh, value add. That's what you're talking about. But I'm not saying people are dishonest, but there's definitely some bad actors. You want to get references from the people who've taken the course and real deals. And you want to see a track record of whatever it is that they're teaching, of at least probably 10 years of doing these strategies. And you want to see a track record. So any guru who's selling a course, there should be a link right on their page, track record of actual deals. You should be able to go and see the actual deals that they've done. A lot of people
have to do that on my page. What are you saying?
Hey, it helps. Anyway, that's my rant. But just do your research before you take a course. Some of these are pretty expensive. I've seen courses like 10,000 plus, and I don't know that you're getting the value out of it.
Any real estate investor course is always, I find they're always in the tens and thousands of dollars. I have friends who've taken they're not called Rich Dad anymore. It's called something else. $40,000 was the buy-in for those ones. $40K.
Yeah.
And I asked them what part of the course did you learn the most from? And they said experience. When I actually started doing it and I found a mentor, that's when I really started learning. It wasn't the course material, it wasn't the $40,000. It was jumping in and learning and having a mentor.
Yeah.
So
well said.
Yeah. So if you get somebody like Sherilynn, you teach these courses.
Yeah.
You get somebody like Sherilynn who's been doing this for quite a long time and successfully for quite a long time and is obviously ethical and professional, then you're in good hands.
Well, and further to what Cory said too, as far as the track record goes, it's a matter of having taken these strategies, whether it's BRRRR or multifamily or fix and flip is sort of like BRRRR, agreement for sale, rent to own, regardless of what your strategy is, even just single family, if you're looking for a single family mentor or just regular rental mentor, have they been through the cycles? Have they been through at least one full cycle? And that's one thing with these recent gurus that Cory was talking about, where there's so many people out there who've only been doing this for 5 years. They haven't been through a full cycle. So it's oh shoot, I can't remember which authors you know the quote I'm talking about though. You see who's swimming naked once the tide goes out, or who something like that. Yeah, thank you.
And I was going to say too, you ask anybody who's been doing real estate for 10 years and multiple deals, I don't want to hear about the home runs. I don't care about doors under management or millions under management. Okay, tell me about the deals that you screwed up on. Tell me about the deals you lost money on. Because if anybody's been in real estate for 10 years, they've been burnt at some point. It happens to every single person. These cycles happen. And the ones that are honest about that and tell you about that, especially in their program, that's gold to someone who's taken that course. People pay way more attention to the losses than they do the gains. Right? I teach multifamily. I've had some doozies. I've made a ton of mistakes. And I talk about that with my students. And I'm sure Sherilynn does the same.
Just going to say that. I've taken Cory's course on multifamily because he wants to learn this and I want to. So, hey, we took each other's courses. But yeah, I mean, I've seen him talk about the good, as I put it on my Facebook channel, I've got the good, the bad, and the ugly of all things real estate. Yeah, and Cory in his course too, and in pretty much everything I've seen him talk about, he talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly of what went down in each deal. And this one was a home run because of this, but then there was this that was a big setback, and here's how we dealt with that. So yeah, if you're talking with a mentor, a guru, a course provider, whoever, who's only talking about the good things, and even on people's Facebook pages that it's all rosy, everything's wonderful. Okay, well, tell me what happened when you found out there was huge horizontal Swiss cheese cracks in the foundation of that house. I want to hear about that, not just your wonderful flips.
Yes, like show the warts, because that's what makes you human. That's what makes you credible, because let's face it, it's not a big ball of roses. I always hate those advertisements they have. You always see them, these real estate investors, 10 years ago or 2 years ago or 6 months ago, I was dead broke. And now look at me. There he is in front of his Lamborghini, in front of this mansion. And I always want to say, is that really your Lamborghini? Or did you just park your Datsun in front of that guy's expensive car, stand in front of his house and try and sell us a, dog and pony show? Anyway, I'll get off my high horse. Gil, do you want to ask the last 3 questions?
Give me 1 second. Although I do agree, we've always said that our mistakes are tuition, and we've always believed that it's great to learn from other people's mistakes. So
Well, your voice is really pixelated. I can't really hear what you're saying.
hold on.
I could answer it though, because I know how.
Is this
Get off
any
your
better?
10 speed. Yeah, that's much better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I was saying that we always called those mistakes tuition, and we've always believed that sharing to it, like, you're not going to teach people by telling them how good you are. You're going to teach people by telling them what to avoid, and that's what we've always done. And it also, people are entertained by your failures as well. Okay, so
Yeah, I'm glad.
As long as you don't zero in on your failures, because they won't want to buy anything from you.
this is true.
So has your life changed for the better, either of you, from being in real estate? This is a tough question.
Go ahead, Sherilynn.
For my background, so we had a little bit of our own money coming into real estate investing, and we made it really work for us, because we would buy low money down, live in the property, fix up the existing suite or build a new suite in one case, and then find another one, buy that with low money down, do it all again. So we stretched our capital quite a ways, but then eventually ran out of it. And as animated as I can be when I'm talking on these things, I am really terrible at selling myself. So getting joint venture money was a huge challenge for me. And when I started doing creative deals, I found that because there's that time horizon that's only 3 to 5 years for most of these deals. So it was really attractive to joint venture partners. And I was buying properties with low money down on the one hand, but then when I was doing rent to own, I was attracting money like crazy. I had people lined up for my next deal, because it's this pretty little package with a little bow on top that says, here's exactly how the deal is supposed to go. And investors loved that. So then I was bringing in other people's money much easier, and then taking all of the profits from all of these creative deals and buying regular rental properties. So I have, my multi-million-dollar portfolio within my corporation was bought with zero of my own dollars. Absolutely no money in my corporation from my pocket.
Sherilynn, my story's a little bit different. The benefits, I mean, I've been at it a long time. I've kind of been a turtle in third gear, going very slow but methodically, always reaching out to people who know more than I do every step of the way. So 2018, I had a setback in my family. My son, he was seriously ill. He's immunocompromised, and I had to take a year sabbatical from work, unpaid. So I basically had a year I spent in Vancouver. He was in BC Kids, and I couldn't work. So that could have dealt a devastating blow to my family. But I had my multifamily assets that were doing well at the time, and to top it all off, 2019, I was working full time. I was working out of town to partially fund my real estate business and also just for my expenses. And 2019, then I lost my job as well. So then all of a sudden I'm without income, and then COVID came along. And then COVID restrictions, especially on my commercial assets, where the government basically decided that my tenants' businesses were shut down, but they weren't offering us anything in compensation, and we had to go to bat for our tenants and give them free rent. So the government just completely hung us out to dry. They told landlords you can't evict people, basically stop paying rent for several months. So I had several things happen to me all at the same time, and I share that story because I had my multifamily assets to back me up, especially when I had to take the year off. If I didn't have that, I don't know what I would have done at that time. I honestly don't. So I'm very thankful and very blessed that my portfolio was there to save me, essentially.
How's your son doing, by the way?
Good. He went on to have a full recovery. He's doing well. He's like playing soccer now, and it's funny. I think I even did a deal during that year. Sometimes good deals come to you. You just never know when, but you have to be awake when that good deal comes across your desk and move on it, regardless of what's going on in life. I mean, life is going to happen no matter what. It doesn't stop for personal circumstances. So, I found a great deal. I made a lot of money. It was a flip in multifamily. It was on more of a contract assignment. I think I had it for 8 months. We made a couple $100,000 in a 6-month period. So it was fantastic. I've done a couple of those as well. So
excellent. Yeah. So keep your eyes open. Well, you have to know what you're looking for too, because if you don't know what you're looking for, you're not going to see it if it hits you in the face, right? So you have to be prepared, and you have to, educate yourself. So you two also have an excellent investor seminar coming up, don't you? Tell us about it. Tell us what it's called and how we get in touch.
Yeah, so it's called the Real Estate Resilience Summit, Property Summit. I got this idea from Sherilynn, actually. Sherilynn invented summits long before I even know what one was. I didn't even know what a funnel was until 6 months ago. I thought it was something that you added oil to your car. Seriously, I didn't know anything about it. So I reached out to Sherilynn early on to get help with my summit. So I did one in March, and she was actually one of my speakers on it. So she's been helping me out with this one as well. She's been very busy. But essentially what it is, we have 20, I think 18 speakers. So it's a 3-day event. It's on October the 14th to the 16th, 14, 15, 16. It's for 6 hours a day. And it is simply just packed with value all in one place. So we have people speaking about, creative. Sherilynn's going to be talking about creative. I'm going to be doing a panel on multifamily with some guys from Ontario. We have someone doing tiny houses. We have banking concepts. We have land. Sorry?
Smith maneuver. We've got
the Smith maneuver. Like, we actually have the guy who invented the Smith maneuver on our show. And I've heard of the Smith maneuver.
Is this the dad or the son? The dad or the son?
Oh, sorry, Robinson. The dad is Fraser, so we have Robinson Smith. But I mean, I heard of the Smith maneuver even before I was doing real estate, like 20 years ago. Like, this has been around a long time. So strategies like this, it's really about resilience. So from the time I did my summit in March to today, the real estate market in Canada has been flipped upside down. Things are completely different. I mean, we're seeing double-digit valuation drops in the Lower Mainland in Ontario. That wasn't happening in March. We were still very much at the peak or just slightly past it. So everyone's had to adapt to resilience. I mean, your cash flows are being crunched. Your variable rate mortgages are going up. Your insurance is going up. Your utilities are going up. Carbon taxes are going up. As investors, we're faced with adversity that we have never seen before. And as Sherilynn said, a lot of these people have never seen a down market. And we're heading into that now. So this Resilience Summit is all for all about people. So there's 3 themes. The first day is going to be all about how do we preserve wealth? How do we look at the situation right now? The second day is we're going to look at new opportunities. So that's why we have the new houses, Airbnbs. We have people going in the US. We're going to sort of fill your brain with all kinds of opportunities that are out there. And then day 3 is really going to be the mindset and pivot to action. So that's the action piece of putting the puzzle all together. So I've had a blast putting this together. It's been a lot of work, but when you go to these summits, it's not like a real conference. You go to a conference, it's great, you meet people, but then you leave and you kind of forget about it. You get a little swag bag and off you go. You're going to get the recordings for life. So you own this. You can go back and look. I still have people that are going back to my summit. Sherilynn has people going back to her summits on YouTube and saying, yeah, I went back to this and look what you said, 3 or 4 years ago about what was happening today. And this is exactly what's happened. Also at this, we're giving away a ton of prizes. So we have a platform where we have engagement prizes. We have something like 20,000 in prizes. So we have tickets to Wealth Hacker. Erwin Zito's putting that on, as well as the multifamily conference. We have some Airbnb getaways. So we have a lot of gifts. Plus, we have basically access to my March summit just to go to the page. So if you just go to resilience.ca page, I'm not sure if you posted the link in this or not, but if you can have it, okay, yeah. So, but if we can get the link on there, yeah, you can just visit the page, check us out. So it's starting in about 9 days, and like I said, we're very excited about it, and it's great. I seriously, I haven't seen anything like this in Canada. I've been to a lot of the free ones out there, but with the lineup that we have, and the star-studded lineup and the people that we have, all in one place, I've never seen this anywhere. So I'm very excited, not only to host some of these speakers, but to take it in myself. This is something I'm going to be referring to a long time forward, because I'm going to be utilizing some of these strategies myself in my lifetime. So this is
how much is
absolutely
the
a wonderful
summit?
thing.
How much is this Wonder Summit?
Yeah, so it's right now it's $99. We had a promotion that ended last week, unfortunately. But part of this $99 too is not only do you get these recordings for life, you also get a personalized action plan. So what you get out of this is we're actually taking the highlights from all the speakers, all the talking points of what is happening today, and we're packaging that all up into an action plan for you. So that's a $500 value right now. And I say that because, when I ask Sherilynn questions, there's different answers than there was, 6 months ago at the March Summit, because, the world has changed. So now you're going to get this plan that's all up to date, and that's all included in the price of admission.
Well, I think
so even if you
$99
can't make it to all or part, sorry,
$99 is extremely reasonable to
It's
have that many
practically
people
free.
Yeah, that's
for
that's
what
right.
we're giving, it's
That is
good.
an excellent price.
Well, and just to go back to what we were saying before about the gurus, there are no fake gurus at this summit. I've seen the speakers list, I've seen the agenda, and it's all people who have huge valuable experience in all of these areas, and well, the breadth of the topics is insane. And then the experience of the speakers, you should add up the years of experience, Cory, and post it somewhere that this is, whatever, 200 years of real estate. Actually, probably be way more than that. But anyway, the experience, they've been through everything. You're not going to find people who know this stuff better.
Yeah, and you can engage the speakers directly as part of this platform.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing. So there's a virtual expo hall where the speakers are going to be in their booths. You can talk to them. You can ask Sherilynn questions directly. The interviews are all going to be hard hitting, and there's no sales pitch here at all. Like, nobody is selling anything. This is just simply about value to our audience. But
Excellent.
in the chat feature, you can ask any question. There's going to be Q&As for every speaker. So you can ask Erwin Zito what you've always wanted to ask him, or Dalia Barsom. She's one of the biggest mortgage brokers in the country. She's going to be live on Sunday. So you get to engage with these speakers directly. So it's a pretty amazing opportunity.
That is amazing. So we wanted to leave a little bit of room for questions. Do you have some questions that people were wanting to bring up?
The only one that I saw on there was, what's the difference between an agreement for sale and a vendor take back? And maybe Sherilynn can give the residential spin, and I'll give the commercial spin. We didn't really distinguish.
So with either way, you're using just a regular purchase agreement. With the agreement for sale, there's the financing schedule built in about how you're dealing with the financing between the buyer and the seller. Now, with agreement for sale, you are not changing legal title. You're not changing legal ownership. You get the beneficial ownership, which is the operational control, but you don't get the title in your name, and you don't get your name on a mortgage. With vendor take back, still purchase agreement, but you're using conventional financing through a bank or other lending institution, and there's a portion of the purchase price that is seller financing, and that's usually registered as a second mortgage after your new bank mortgage, and title does transfer.
Yeah, so in commercial and apartments, it's very much exactly like what you just said. But a vendor take is not limited to only part of it. You can have a vendor take as a first and only mortgage. So a building that I bought, was the guy owned it free and clear. He gave me a 92% VTB. That was the only mortgage. So I negotiated a 3-year term of interest-only payments. So that's still counted. But you're right. In most cases, if I'm trying to buy a building that, let's say there's 50% debt on it, right? I want to top that up. So I basically have three options. The agreement for sale is one of the better ones, right? Because you can buy that building with the 20% down. The second is you can assume the mortgage that's there and take a VTB top up to get you up to 75%. So let's say the vendor takes 25. But there's actually a third option called a pari passu. So what that is you go to the lender who's holding the mortgage and you say to them, like, look, there's a big bunch of equity in here. The rent's gone up. Hey, give me a break. Give me another mortgage. Give me a second mortgage at first terms on top of that. So if there's 3 years left on that mortgage you've assumed, sometimes they will actually do a pari passu and actually marry it to the first. It's two separate mortgages that come due at the same time. Now, lenders don't like to tell you this, that they do this, because they want to sell you a second mortgage where they can make much higher money in points and an interest rate. But always ask for a pari passu if you're assuming a mortgage, especially if the seller is not, willing to do a vendor take. So that's the main differences that I see.
So just to clarify too, so with single family, it's really, really difficult to assume a mortgage. At least it is in Alberta. Mm-hmm. So, and with multifamily or commercial, it's relatively easy to assume a mortgage. And that's why you can do those things with assuming the mortgage, getting title transferred, having some seller financing, but not necessarily using the agreement for sale procedure of doing it. So you can have title transfer, you can have your name put on the mortgage, you can have a big chunk of seller financing, but not through agreement for sale. But it's still a creative finance deal. It's just not agreement for sale. But yeah, with single family,
law because I thought that all mortgages were assumable in Alberta, but maybe that has changed in the last 10 years.
Technically, all mortgages are assumable in Alberta.
Okay.
Actually, it's not going to happen. So, and even if it's an owner occupier, it is really difficult to get an owner occupied mortgage assumed. For instance, they look at your debt coverage ratio differently. Because I have family that tried to do this. They tried to assume an existing mortgage, and they couldn't qualify to assume the mortgage because of the way that the bank looked at their debt payments. For some reason, their HELOC was calculated differently. They had to have a huge monthly principal payment included. But when they went to apply for a brand new mortgage, all they had to account for was the interest payment of the HELOC, so they could qualify for a mortgage, but they couldn't qualify to assume that exact same mortgage, both owner occupied, same house.
Interesting. That could take us down a whole other road, which we don't have time to do. But I want to thank both of you very much.
Somebody asked if the recordings are available. I know we're wrapping out of time.
Yes, I'm going to post them on my YouTube channel, which is Nelda Schulte. I'm also going to post them on Facebook Live on my Facebook group, which is Alberta Landlords Watch members group. You have to be a member to get the video, but you don't have to be a member to watch the video on YouTube. So I want to thank Cory Sperle and Sherilynn Milsom very much for joining and helping educate us with creative strategies for real estate. And I am selling something. You might not be, but I am, because I have a book that's coming out. It's called Canadian Landlord's Handbook. And it's going to be available tomorrow, actually. It's available on Kindle KDP right now, and it's going to be available on Amazon tomorrow, and it's going to be free for 4 days. So I'll be posting that as well. And that's for anybody who is buying property and you want to know how to self-manage. If you like this session, like it on Facebook. If you liked it on YouTube, like it and or subscribe to my channel and or share it with anybody who you believe would benefit from this. If people are looking for creative real estate deals and you say, look, watch this video, it'll get you started. By all means, be generous and share. And of course, if you want free and reasonably priced landlording and property investment resources, jump onto my website, neldaschulte.com, and click on the green membership button, and you can get a lot of stuff for free. So thanks again. And also thank you to Gil for asking some of the questions. He's joining us from BC, or he's joining us from BC. Sherry and I are both in Alberta, but not in the same city. So that is the joy of technology. So thank you for joining us. Like this, and we will post everything and give access to members and people on YouTube tomorrow. Ciao for now.
Awesome.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much. I guess I'm off by myself.